Okay, let's look at the data and actually calculating these measures. And so here's the data from Newfoundland to Nunavut, the ranking, that percentage of people that ranked healthcare good or excellent in each of these years. And so we'll just look first at calculating these measures with the spreadsheet. And so standard deviation is actually the easiest number to calculate. So what we type it at STDEV. Bracket, and you can highlight the data that you want to take the standard deviation of. So that's where the 4.67 comes from. Notice that when we type in STDEV, it gives you some different options, and so we can just do the sample standard deviation, which is what we're going to do. It was a survey, and it didn't include everybody in the country, so we're going to just look at the sample. But you could argue that this is a population because it's every province, and so we're going to we could do the population standard deviation as well. And so just to do the sample standard deviation, highlight and click. If you wanted to do the population, just if you're wondering like what's the big deal, what's the difference between doing a sample and a population? If I highlight the standard deviation of the population, you notice that the number is actually not much different. We could argue that well, that's 0.2% lower, almost, and so, but really they are close together. So for the sake of it, we are going to do the sample, but they are actually close together. The IQR, we're going to do the Q1 first. Quartile is how you find the quartile, so equals quartile, and then highlight. Don't highlight standard deviation and say quartile 1. And so that's how you get the first quartile. So you don't type Q1, you type quartile, and then you can just copy that over for the year 2005. And then quartile, we're going to do the third quartile. Make sure we've highlighted the right data. Quartile 2 is actually the median. So if you want to check that, you can play around with that. So that's quartile 3. I'll make those percentages. The IQR is the quartile 3 subtract quartile 1. So we can just subtract the numbers. So equals this minus this. So that's IQR. And the range. The range is actually IQR in Q1 and Q3. Standard deviation is the hardest to understand, but the range is actually the hardest to calculate. So what we do is we take the max of this data. You can just find it too, but if you had like 500 data points, it's harder to find. Subtract the min of the data, and that's going to be the range, 18.82%. And so that's actually how to calculate all the measures with the spreadsheet. Now, just a couple things that are interesting to say is this measure of standard deviation, if we removed Nunavut from the data, what happens to the data? And so I just kind of copy and paste it so you can see. And just a reminder that standard deviation is the distance that a point is. I'm copying and pasting the wrong thing here. The standard deviation is the typical distance a point is from the average. And so what that number of 4.67 means is if you take the average of 83.27, typically points are going to be 4.67 above that and 4.67 below that. So that's an explanation for standard deviation. Okay, so just looking at the data, if we took out, what we're going to find out is an outlier, Nunavut. You notice how like the numbers actually change. So much more consistency in the provinces. 4.41 decreases to 3.15. The IQR doesn't really change that much, although you do lose your minimum point. The ranges decrease substantially because there's that point that's below the rest of the data. And so that's just a little bit of review of how to calculate these.